Coming up on this Wednesday edition of Newsline at noon, responding to North Korea's proposal to reopen the Mount Geumgang tourism project, South Korea says the two should first focus on normalizing their industrial complex in Gaeseong and the reunion of families separated by the Korean War before moving on to the tourist project next month. Concerns are looming over a potential crisis in emerging markets, including India and Indonesia, as investors begin to exit from those economies ahead of the US Federal Reserve's planned tapering of its stimulus program. Plus, over in Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood condemns the arrest of its spiritual leader by the military-backed interim government, and Washington warns Egypt's new rulers that their harsh crackdown on protests could influence US aid to Cairo. These stories and more on Newsline at noon.
Where's the best place for bibimbap?
Les Jeux Olympiques d'hiver se dérouleront-ils à Pyeongchang?
هل أنتم حقاً سابع أكبر مصدر في العالم؟
この歌手は誰ですか？你好，最近哪部电视剧的人气最旺？
Korea is attracting interest from around the world. The more you know, the more you want to know. Dynamic Korea.
Thanks for joining us. You're watching Newsline at noon. I'm Choi Yu-sun here in Seoul.
Good to have you with us. I'm Mark Brew, and we kick off this midday newscast with Seoul's response to Pyongyang's proposal to discuss their suspended tourism operations. Following days of consideration, the South Korean government suggested the two Koreas meet on September 25th at the Mount Geumgang Tourism Park instead of this Thursday, as the North had proposed, to negotiate reopening the mountain resort, which has been shut for more than 5 years.
Seoul's Unification Ministry said the discussion should not be rushed and that the two sides should first focus on normalizing the joint Gaeseong industrial complex and successfully arranging reunions of families separated since the Korean War. The two Koreas had agreed to discuss family reunions on Friday, but they have yet to decide on the venue of the meeting. While Seoul stresses the reunion and tourism issues are separate, Pyongyang earlier Tuesday urged the South to agree to both talks this week, saying the two issues are linked. The president of the International Committee of the Red Cross, Peter Maurer, has begun a rare visit to South and North Korea, pledging to strengthen ties with both countries and kickstart reunions of families separated since the Korean War. A Red Cross spokesperson says the visit by the head of the agency is the first to both Koreas in 21 years. The ICRC added Maurer, who is currently in Pyongyang, hopes to hold talks with high-level officials from both Koreas to turn the sporadic reunions into something regular. Reunions have not been held for nearly 3 years, and most applicants are very elderly, so the swift resumption of the reunions takes on extra urgency. Maurer will travel to Seoul next week after a short stop in Beijing for meetings with senior South Korean government officials and Red Cross officials. South Korean companies with factories at the Inter-Korean Gaeseong Industrial Complex are gearing up to get back to work. The businesses will visit the factory zone starting Thursday through next Friday to check up on the conditions of their facilities there. The joint industrial park has been shuttered for more than 4 months now after the North unilaterally withdrew all North Korean workers amid an escalation of inter-Korean tensions. Meanwhile, the two Koreas have exchanged their draft proposals for the formation of a joint committee to oversee the management of the complex, which was one of the safeguards the two sides agreed on to prevent another shutdown. The UN Special Commission investigating human rights violations in North Korea held its first hearing on Tuesday with direct testimony from those who experienced abuses firsthand. Our Hwang Sung-hee brings us the stories of the North Korean defectors who want their voices heard and for the world to take notice.
North Korean defector Shin Dong-hyuk lost his finger after guards at Camp 14, one of North Korea's many prison camps, cut it off as a punishment for damaging camp property by mistake. The 31-year-old was born in Camp 14 and spent most of his life there until his escape, with no sense of freedom or rights as a human being.
A camp prisoner must ask for permission from the guards before eating scraps off the ground, or even before he or she can eat a rat that they found.
Around 200,000 people are believed to be imprisoned in North Korea's prison camps today, where they are malnourished or even worked to death. In an effort to end such widespread abuses of human rights in the communist state, the United Nations Commission of Inquiry began a 5-day hearing in Seoul on Tuesday. The 3-member panel, headed by Michael Kirby, will collect evidence that supports the alleged violations through testimony like that given by Shin.
The plans going forward are to conclude the series of hearings in Seoul, in Korea. That will be in the middle of next week. We then go to Tokyo in Japan, where the focus will be substantially upon abductees in that country to North Korea.
North Korea has denied any human rights abuses and has said that UN inspectors will not be allowed on North Korean soil. The investigation, the first of its kind, is not expected to have an immediate impact on improving the dire human rights conditions in the north, but it's believed it will help publicize the issue globally and perhaps add pressure on the regime.
The commission is a flicker of hope for not only myself, but for those living in prison camps and in North Korea. Those in the north don't know that such an investigation is taking place, but we have big hopes about it nonetheless.
The commission will wrap up its investigation by the end of this year and will give its final report to the UN's Human Rights Council in March 2014. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
And now on to the latest in international efforts to end the North's nuclear program. South Korea's chief nuclear envoy, Jo Tae-yong, will hold talks with his Japanese counterpart, Junichi Ihara, in Seoul on Thursday. Korea's foreign ministry says the two will exchange views about the current state of affairs on the Korean peninsula and ways to address Pyongyang's nuclear weapons program. Speaking to reporters in Seoul Tuesday, a high-ranking official says there's a need to figure out exactly where the North stands in terms of denuclearization through talks with other six-party member nations. The official added, without Pyongyang's willingness, the multilateral dialogue would not be able to resume. A county in the U.S. state of Maryland has sent guidelines to its teachers asking them to make it clear to their students that the body of water between Korea and Japan is referred to by both names, the East Sea and Sea of Japan. The assistant superintendent of Anne Arundel County also asked the principals and teachers of public schools to explain the controversy surrounding the labeling of the waters if the textbooks used in geography classes only use the term Sea of Japan. The Korean government argues the name Sea of Japan comes from Japan's imperialistic past and that at the very least, both names should be used. Unionised workers at Hyundai Motor are downing tools for the second straight day on this Wednesday. The strike began Tuesday with union members demanding higher wages and bonuses, as well as an improvement in working conditions for part-time workers and extending the retirement age. The workers are staging 2-hour strikes twice a day in separate groups. Hyundai estimates nearly $78 million will be lost in production during the 2-day strike. They are scheduled to return to negotiations with management on Thursday. Union members of Korea's second-largest automaker Kia Motors decided to follow suit and are holding similar partial strikes today, with the company estimating a production loss of around $35 million. With expectations mounting over the US Federal Reserve's plans to scale back its monetary easing policies, global investors are pulling their funds out of emerging markets. India is suffering the most and is looking down the barrel of its worst recession since 2008. Yulian reports.
Stocks and currencies in a number of developing Asian markets fell this week as global investors continued to withdraw funds in anticipation of the Fed's plans to taper its stimulus measures. The Asian markets did take a pause on Wednesday ahead of the release of the minutes from U.S. Fed's July policy meeting. But over the past 2 days, Indonesia's benchmark index plunged over 8%, and India's stock market tumbled nearly 6% over the past 3 sessions. The Indian rupee also slumped to a record low against the greenback on Tuesday, fueling fears that the Asia's third largest economy is headed towards a full-blown crisis.
Government, even though it acknowledges the seriousness in words, but in action, the government remains complacent.
Despite the Indian government's passive stance, experts say the situation is serious and the worst is yet to come.
So I think this time the recession is more fundamental, more India-centric recession, whereas US has been progressing, and I think it's more serious and it could be definitely more troublesome. I think the unfortunate reality is we are in for, I think, more troubled time than the 2008 recession.
India is one of the countries most vulnerable to an exodus of foreign capital because it has been seeing its current account deficit reach new highs in recent months. Experts say countries that have a weak current account balance and a low growth rate are most prone to a pullout. In what's being seen as markets reacting to the end of the so-called Bernanke boom, countries like Brazil and South Africa have also seen their currencies weaken as of late. Analysts expect Korea to remain relatively safe from any drastic pullout, as it has been posting a current account surplus month after month. Yurian, Arirang News.
For your fill of Korean and international news, join Chae Yu-sun and Mark Broom every weekday at lunchtime. Newsline at noon.
Plenary session this Wednesday and vote on the government restructuring bills.
The turmoil in Egypt was exacerbated on Tuesday as the most senior leader of the Muslim Brotherhood was arrested in Cairo. While the Brotherhood vows to continue protests for the reinstatement of ousted President Mohamed Morsi, the U.S. is reviewing its aid to the North African country. Our Kim Ji-yeon has the latest.
The Muslim Brotherhood was quick to condemn the arrest of its spiritual leader Mohamed Badie. A spokesman said the arrest was part of a plot against the 2011 revolution that ousted former President Hosni Mubarak. The interim government accused Badie of murder and inciting violence.
With regards to the arrest of our leader, Mohamed Badie, we move as an alliance. He runs peaceful protests. He is a symbol. We are greatly saddened about his arrest, and we are greatly saddened about him being taken to prison without being prosecuted without any legal procedures.
The army-backed authorities detained Badie near the site of a protest camp in Cairo after suppressing rallies there that were filled with supporters of overthrown President Mohamed Morsi. Egypt is still in a state of emergency with more than 900 people killed since last Wednesday, following a brutal crackdown on pro-Morsi supporters by the interim government. The turmoil in Egypt has deeply alarmed the international community. It has prompted the United States to adopt a harder line toward Egypt's military-backed government, but it stressed U.S. aid to Cairo was not immediately suspended.
The other thing I can confirm for you is that because we have not made a decision to cut off aid to Egypt, it is possible that additional tranches of aid could go out. But that's something that's being evaluated on a case-by-case basis.
At issue is whether the U.S. will continue to send about $1.2 billion in U.S. military assistance and about $240 million in economic aid to Egypt every year. Egypt's interim government, supported by Israel and Saudi Arabia, says it will resist any external pressure in its internal affairs. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Amid the turmoil and political upheaval in Egypt, the country's Christian minority are increasingly falling victim to attacks by Islamist gangs. A Coptic Christian group, the Maspero Youth Union, says at least 6 Christians have been killed over the past week, and dozens of churches have been attacked and churchgoers terrorized. An Egyptian human rights group says Islamists have attacked homes, shops, schools, and youth clubs, making Christians the scapegoat for supporting the military ousting of deposed Islamist President Mohamed Morsi. Global news channel Al Jazeera has launched a new cable service in the U.S. on Tuesday with an aim to offer unbiased and in-depth reports to its viewers. But it may face an uphill battle as the name of the network is perceived by many as being anti-American. Our Son Jung-in reports.
Al Jazeera, a global news channel watched in more than 130 countries, has kicked off its news service Al Jazeera America, with former CNN reporter Tony Harris opening the service with reports on Egypt. The new cable channel replaces current TV, the cable television network founded by former U.S. Vice President Al Gore, which the Qatar-based broadcaster acquired in January 2013 for around $500 million. With a staff of about 1,000 at its headquarters in New York and 12 stateside bureaus, Al Jazeera America will broadcast daily 14 hours of straight news.
I think what's making Al Jazeera America special, number one, is it's a fact-based, in-depth journalism with heavy in documentary and the investigative.
Yet some say it may be a tough sell to audiences because Al Jazeera is remembered by many Americans as the network that broadcasted messages from Osama bin Laden after the 9/11 terrorist attack.
I think many Americans associate Al Jazeera TV with Al-Qaeda or just terrorism in general, because a lot of times when we hear reports of Al-Qaeda or anyone else, any other terrorist group claiming responsibility for something, they're doing it through Al Jazeera.
The question now remains on whether it will be able to overcome this reputation as it competes with other American news channels. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
A storage tank at Japan's crippled Fukushima nuclear plant seeped out 300 tons of dangerously radioactive water Tuesday, the worst incident of its kind since the March 2011 meltdown. The plant's operator TEPCO said Tuesday's leak is separate from contaminated water leaks reported in recent weeks, which had also recorded about 300 tons of seepage a day. Reuters reports the water is so contaminated that a person standing next to it will get a radiation dose 5 times the annual global limit for nuclear workers within just 1 hour. As a result, Japan will raise the danger level of the leak to level 3, which means serious incident on an international scale for radiological releases. The water leaks at Fukushima had been previously assigned the second lowest level 1 rating. Relations between Korea and Japan have been on a bumpy path in recent years, but a group of Japanese social media reporters have come to Seoul with hopes to play a role in smoothing out future relations. Our Ji Myung-gil spent some time with the young visitors and shows us how this group may spark new dialogue on the web.
This is a group of social media reporters from Japan. They are on a 5-day tour across Korea starting Tuesday. And on the bus ride to Seoul, they are full of enthusiasm.
We are so excited to be here, and we are going to have such a great time.
But they are here not just for fun, but with a purpose.
My mother is Korean. I did exchange student programs at Seoul National University, and I've come here so I can later report on Korea through our social networking sites.
Korean culture. I'm especially interested in Korean buildings. For example, the Korean temples. I want to compare the difference between Japanese temples and Korean temples.
These reporters will study Korea's indigenous cultures, religion, and the daily lives of Korean people. On the first day, they held a reunion with Seoul National University students who had gone to Japan prior to their visit. After that, a welcoming ceremony was held at Korea's Foreign Ministry, followed by a trip to the Royal Toksu Palace. Each social media reporter will have the duty of writing about Korea once they wrap up their trip here and go back to Japan. Amid the fun and excitement, the reporters still have some sensitive issues they want to discuss.
Japanese youth have a lot of interest in Korea and the relations between the two countries. I think politicians from both sides should stop wrangling over the complicated historical issues and move on with the future.
Currently, Abe is very popular in Japan since he's striving to revive Japan's economy and bring back confidence to the Japanese people, but he's causing some friction with neighboring countries.
These young reporters will potentially play a role in molding future relations between Korea and Japan, and each person seems to be happy to play that role. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
Now, it's not every day that traditional Korean music instrument masters demonstrate their elaborate skills to the public, but that's exactly what's going on at the National Geumgang Center in southern Seoul. Our cultural correspondent Park Ji-won went to check it out.
63-year-old Ko Heung-gun has devoted the past 44 years of his life to making traditional Korean string instruments. Designated as Important Intangible Cultural Asset number 42, Go says the entire process begins with a high-quality royal impress tree that's grown for more than 30 years and then dried for about 10 more years. Only then can he proceed with making a 12-string 가야금 or 6-string 거문고, both of which date back more than 1,000 years. Silk threads spun from cocoons are used for strings, and all the ornaments are dyed with natural ingredients. Altogether, he has to go through about 300 different processes by hand.
The craft of instrument making is all about sound. Every step of the process takes a lot of effort in order to produce a good quality sound.
Korea has some 20 kinds of traditional drums in all different shapes and sizes. While most countries have a musical tradition of using some sort of drum, Korean drums boast a unique pattern and design, mostly notable by its taeguk or the yin-yang symbol. Korea has also other traditional percussion instruments, pyeonjong and pyeongyang, a bronze bell chime and stone chime instrument, respectively. These instruments were originally derived from ancient China. However, Master Kim Hyun-gon, who has spent nearly 6 decades crafting musical instruments, says that Korea developed its own design and sound in the 15th century.
Korean instruments are significantly different from ancient Chinese instruments in their patterns, colors, and shapes of the chimes.
This rare demonstration by the nation's intangible cultural asset masters is open to the public through this Sunday at the National Geumgang Center in southern Seoul. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
The intense heat wave that has been hanging over Korea for weeks now is more than just a mild irritant to people going about their day-to-day business. It's causing a great amount of damage to the nation's rivers and coastline. Millions of dead fish have been washed ashore and rivers have turned green because of harmful algal blooms which thrive in the sweltering temperatures. Connie Lee has more.
The waters of Yongsan River in southwestern Korea look more like green paint. It's harmful algal blooms that are consuming the waters of Korea and hurting the country's source of drinking water and its fishing industry. Along the coastlines, millions of dead fish have been washed ashore because of algae that have grown out of control and produce toxic effects in the sea. This summer's high temperatures of 30 degrees Celsius and beyond, and high levels of nutrients and low water flows have caused a record level of harmful algal blooms all around the nation's waters, from the southern coast and now towards the east coast. And especially here at Yongsan River, environmentalists are raising concern that Korea's 4 major rivers restoration project is encouraging the conditions for the green algae to spread. They see the reservoirs and the mini dams built as part of the redevelopment project have slowed the water flow and turned parts of the rivers into standing water, the perfect breeding conditions for green beds of algae. The green tide is not expected to go away soon here at Yongsan River, and officials expect the green waters to last until next month. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
Not a very pretty sight there. Well, let's get a weather update with our weathercaster Lee Ji-yeon standing by at Arirang's Weather Center. Good afternoon to you, Ji-yeon.
Well, good afternoon, guys. Do you know what I've noticed this morning?
No, Ji-yeon, I can't say I have, no.
Well, the sun is coming up a lot later, so I looked it up and found that today's sunrise was at 5:53 a.m. That's 25 minutes later compared to a month ago.
Yes, I also noticed that this morning, as it happens, and it means the sun is going down earlier as well. And I like that the seasons are changing. It's getting a little bit cooler, but it's nice to have those long days and those long nights, isn't it?
Right, I agree with you, Mark. But you know, the sunset and sunrise stunning in fall, so let's also look forward to that.
Well, that's right, Yusan. And unlike the time change for sunrise and sunset, the ongoing heat wave doesn't seem to have changed that much. Well, just like yesterday, temperature should be soaring to mid to upper 30s in the afternoon today. So the mercury won't drop too much for the western parts of the country, while the eastern regions will have another cool day with easterly winds blowing through. But I guess the wind is not cool enough to make people in the east less stressful, because the index shows that almost everybody will be very stressful in the afternoon today. So take it easy, everyone. But tomorrow will be a different story. Cooler readings are expected due to rain across the country. The welcome rain will start from Jeju and Busan tomorrow morning and spread to all regions by the afternoon. So hopefully this will help ease the droughts in the southern provinces and Jeju Island. Well, right now it's not looking too bad, but more clouds will be building into the nation towards the midday. With that, let's take a look at today's numbers. Now, Seoul and Daegu will hike up to 33 degrees Celsius. That's 91 degrees Fahrenheit. It looks like Gwangju will soar to 35 again, and Busan should be slightly cooler at 31. Now, let's see how other regions are looking. It looks like Jeju will remain hot, but there is a slim chance of passing showers in the afternoon for Jeju, and it looks like Dokdo and Mount Geumgang should be the coolest place to be today at 27. Now that's all for me today. Hope you have a great rest of the day, and back to you guys in the studio.
Well, thank you ever so much as always, Jian, and those are the stories we're following at this hour.
Thank you for joining us on this Wednesday here in Seoul, and we'll be back at the same time tomorrow at noon.